You're in your early 20s. You just landed the kind of job you used to imagine. While sitting in college lectures or working late shifts somewhere you knew you wouldn't stay forever. The first real paycheck hits your bank account. Not the internship money, not the random part-time cash. This one feels different. You look at the number, and suddenly life seems a little bigger. Maybe you order food without checking the price. Maybe you upgrade something small in your life because for the first time, it feels like you can. It feels like you finally stepped into adulthood. And for a while, everything feels like progress. You move into a slightly better place. You buy a few nicer things. You go out more often. Then something strange happens. Years pass. Your income grows. Promotions come. Maybe you switch jobs and earn more than you ever thought you would when you were younger. But your bank account never really changes. Every month seems to reset. Money comes in, and then somehow it's gone again. You're not doing anything wild. You're not blowing thousands in casinos or buying luxury watches. You're just living a normal life. And that's exactly where the problem begins. Because the biggest financial traps most people fall into aren't dramatic mistakes. They're normal decisions that quietly shape the next 40 years of your life. Let's imagine someone named Alex. Alex is doing pretty well by most standards. Good job, good friends, social life, weekend plans, vacations when possible. Nothing looks wrong from the outside. But the story of Alex's finances tells a completely different story. When Alex got the first full-time job offer, there was a moment that felt uncomfortable. The salary number appeared in the email. It felt like a lot compared to anything earned before. And the easiest thing to do in that moment was simply say yes. No questions, no discussion, just gratitude for the opportunity. That moment lasted about 30 seconds. But moments like that can quietly shape every paycheck that comes afterward. Because salaries don't exist in isolation. Raises are built on top of them. Bonuses are often calculated from them. Future job offers are often influenced by them. The starting point becomes the floor everything else grows from. But in the moment, none of that feels obvious. It just feels like relief. Relief that the job search is over. Relief that real life is finally beginning. And that feeling pushes people to move on without ever questioning the number. Years later, Alex earns more money than ever before. Yet the financial pressure still feels strangely familiar. Another thing that happened along the way felt harmless too. Investing always sounded like something people did later. Later when life felt more stable. Later when the student loans were smaller. Later when the next promotion came. Housing played its own role in the story too. When Alex moved to a new place, there were two options. One was practical. The other felt like the kind of place someone successful would live. Better light, better neighborhood, closer to restaurants and friends. The price difference didn't feel huge in the moment, just a few $100s each month. And when you're earning a decent salary, a few $100s doesn't feel life-changing. But decisions that repeat every month quietly add up. Housing is one of the biggest expenses most people will ever commit to. Once the lease is signed, everything else in the budget has to adjust around it. And small differences repeated hundreds of times across years eventually become large numbers. There was another subtle trap waiting. The difference between the salary, written on paper, and the money that actually arrives in your bank account. The first paycheck after starting a full-time job surprises a lot of people. Taxes, insurance, retirement contributions, other deductions. Suddenly, the number you planned your life around looks very different in reality. But by that point, many decisions have already been made. Rent has been chosen, bills have been scheduled, and if the math doesn't quite work, the easiest solution becomes the same. Credit card that quietly introduced itself earlier. Social pressure added another layer. Not direct pressure, just observation. Friends going to new restaurants. Weekend trips appearing on Instagram. Events, concerts, celebrations. It starts to feel like everyone else is doing well financially. So you keep up. But the funny thing about modern life is that people usually see each other's highlights, not their bank statements. The friend posting vacation photos might still be paying off the flight. The nice apartment might be stretching someone's budget to the limit. The confident lifestyle might actually be held together by credit. But from the outside, it looks effortless. And that illusion shapes how people spend their own money. Credit scores quietly enter the story later. Most people ignore them for years. They don't feel urgent until the moment they suddenly matter. Applying for an apartment, refinancing a loan, trying to qualify for a mortgage. Then suddenly that number determines interest rates, deposits, approvals. Two people earning similar salaries can pay very different amounts over time simply because their credit histories look different. And finally, there's the quiet drain almost nobody notices. Subscriptions, streaming platforms, cloud storage, apps, memberships, trials that turned into monthly charges. Individually, they look harmless. But most people underestimate how many they have. Every month, small amounts leave the account automatically. Because they're automated, they rarely get questioned. And over years, those tiny charges quietly consume thousands of dollars that could have been building something instead. None of these choices looked dramatic when Alex made them. That's the important part. There was no single reckless moment, just a collection of ordinary decisions that millions of people make every day. Each one felt reasonable. Each one felt small. But together they shaped the financial direction of an entire adult life. The system around us encourages these patterns. Car financing makes expensive vehicles feel accessible. Credit cards make spending painless. Advertising constantly connects spending with identity and success. Social media amplifies lifestyles that look effortless. And nobody is standing beside you explaining the long-term consequences in real time. But the good news is that the same ordinary decisions that slowly create financial stress can also create financial freedom. Small actions repeated consistently over time change everything. Negotiating when opportunities appear. Starting investments early, even if the amounts feel tiny. Driving something practical instead of something impressive. Paying off high-interest debt aggressively. Letting raises improve your future instead of just your lifestyle. Being intentional about housing costs. Tracking spending honestly. Ignoring the financial theater that social media often becomes. And occasionally doing something very simple that surprisingly few people do. Opening your bank statement and asking yourself a basic question. Is this spending actually improving my life? If the answer is yes, keep it. If the answer is no, redirect it toward the future version of yourself. Because the real advantage of being young financially isn't how much you earn. It's how much time your decisions have to compound. Time can quietly multiply good choices, or it can quietly multiply the consequences of careless ones. Either way, the clock doesn't stop. And the earlier someone realizes that, the more control they gain over what the next few decades will look like. Not because they made one heroic financial move, but because they started making small, smart decisions before everyone else realized how much those decisions mattered. The strange part about money is that most people don't notice the moment when their habits start shaping their future. It doesn't happen during a dramatic event. It happens on normal Tuesdays, on quiet evenings when you're scrolling your phone and ordering something you probably didn't need, on weekends when a quick dinner turns into a much bigger bill than expected, on those small, everyday choices that don't feel important enough to think about twice. Alex didn't wake up one morning thinking, I'm going to ruin my financial future today. Nobody does. Instead, life just kept moving. More responsibilities showed up. More bills appeared. More things felt necessary. Somewhere along the way, Alex noticed something uncomfortable. Even though income had grown over the years, the sense of financial freedom never really appeared. There was always something waiting. A payment, a bill, a surprise expense. And that's when a realization slowly started to form. Making more money doesn't automatically make life easier. If spending grows at the same speed as income, the pressure never disappears. It just changes shape. That realization is usually the moment when people start asking a different question. Not, how can I earn more? But where's my money actually going? That question sounds simple. But for most people, the answer is surprisingly unclear. Think about it. If someone asked you right now to list every place your money goes each month, could you do it from memory? Most people can't. And that's not because they're careless. It's because modern life makes spending incredibly easy and incredibly invisible. A tap here, a subscription there, automatic payments running quietly in the background. Money leaves the account without demanding attention. So Alex decided to do something that felt uncomfortable at first. Actually look, not guess, not estimate, but look, 3 months of bank statements. Every purchase, every charge, every automatic payment. The result was surprising. Not because there were huge, shocking expenses, but because there were so many small ones. Coffee runs that added up to hundreds. Food delivery that slowly replaced cooking. Subscriptions that hadn't been used in months. Impulse purchases that felt harmless at the time. Individually, none of them were dramatic. Together, they told a very different story. It's a strange feeling when you see your financial life clearly for the first time, because suddenly you realize something powerful. Your money is already working very hard, just not always for you. Sometimes it's working for companies that know exactly how to design systems that encourage spending. Streaming services make canceling harder than signing up. Online stores make checkout effortless. Advertising appears everywhere, constantly suggesting upgrades to your life. None of that is accidental. Entire industries exist to make spending feel natural. But here's the interesting twist. Once Alex noticed the patterns, something changed. Spending didn't stop. Life didn't become boring or restricted. But awareness created control, and control created choices. Some subscriptions disappeared, not because they were expensive, but because they weren't valuable. Cooking happened more often, not because restaurants were forbidden, but because the habit had become automatic. Transportation decisions became more practical, not because nicer things were bad, but because the long-term cost finally became visible. None of these changes were extreme. That's the secret most people miss about improving finances. It doesn't require extreme discipline. It requires awareness and consistency. Small improvements repeated over time. Alex also started doing something else that felt small but turned out to be powerful. Paying attention to the future, not obsessing over it, just acknowledging it. Every paycheck, a small portion quietly moved somewhere else. An investment account. At first, the amount looked almost meaningless. So small it barely seemed worth doing. But something interesting happens when money starts working in the background. You stop relying only on your job to build your future. You create another engine, one that runs quietly while you live your life. Months passed, then years, and slowly something changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but noticeably. The sense of financial pressure started shrinking. Savings appeared where there used to be nothing. Debt started disappearing instead of lingering. Decisions felt calmer. Opportunities felt less risky. And that's the real definition of financial freedom. Not luxury cars, not huge houses, not flashy lifestyles. Freedom is the ability to make choices without fear constantly sitting in the background. Freedom is knowing an unexpected expense won't destroy your month. Freedom is having options, and options are built slowly, not through one lucky moment, but through hundreds of quiet decisions. Looking back, Alex realized something surprising. The difference between financial stress and financial stability wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even income. It was awareness. The willingness to pause and ask a simple question. Is this decision helping the future version of me or hurting them? That question changes everything. Because once you start asking it regularly, your habits begin to shift automatically. You start choosing what truly matters, ignoring what doesn't. And over time, the results compound in ways that feel almost unbelievable. Not because the strategy was complicated, but because consistency is powerful when given enough time. And that's the part most people misunderstand about money. We imagine success comes from huge moves, but most financial success actually comes from ordinary behavior repeated for decades. Quiet investing, thoughtful spending, avoiding unnecessary debt, living slightly below your means instead of exactly at them. These things don't look exciting on social media, but they build lives that feel very different 20 years later. And the best part is this. You don't have to rewind time to start. You don't need the perfect moment. You don't need a huge salary. You just need the willingness to notice where you are today and start making slightly better decisions tomorrow. Because the earlier you start making those decisions, the more powerful time becomes. And time, more than anything else, is the one advantage that can transform ordinary financial habits into extraordinary results. And once Alex started paying attention, something interesting happened. Money stopped feeling mysterious. Before that moment, it always felt like something that came and went randomly. Paychecks arrived, bills disappeared, and whatever remained just sort of faded away into daily life. But once Alex slowed down and really looked at the patterns, it became obvious that money wasn't random at all. It was predictable. Every dollar had a direction. Some dollars built the future. Some dollars quietly destroyed it. And most people never realize which is which. Think about the way people talk about money when they're young. There's always this idea that the real financial planning will start later. Later when the career feels stable. Later when the income is higher. Later when life slows down. But the reality is that life almost never slows down. Responsibilities increase. Opportunities appear. Unexpected problems happen. And suddenly 10 years have passed faster than anyone expected. Alex noticed something else too. The people who seemed the most financially calm weren't necessarily the people making the most money. Some of them actually earned less. But their habits were different. They weren't constantly upgrading everything in their lives. They didn't feel pressure to match every lifestyle they saw online. They were comfortable driving normal cars, living in practical places, spending intentionally instead of automatically. And most importantly, they had systems. Simple systems that made good decisions happen without constant effort. Because relying on motivation is exhausting, but relying on systems works. For example, Alex created a rule that every time income increased, a portion of that increase would automatically move somewhere else, before it could be spent, not after, before. That small change created something powerful. Instead of asking, "Can I afford to invest this month?" the question disappeared completely. The investment already happened. Life simply adjusted around what remained. And strangely, nothing felt worse. The lifestyle didn't collapse. Happiness didn't disappear. Most spending habits adjusted naturally. That's something people rarely realize. We often believe our happiness depends on maintaining every current convenience. But humans adapt incredibly fast. What once felt necessary often turns out to be optional. Alex also started asking a different question when making purchases. Not, "Can I afford this today?" but, "Will I still be glad I bought this next year?" That question eliminates a surprising number of impulse purchases. Because most spending decisions are driven by emotion in the moment. Excitement, stress, boredom, convenience. But when you stretch the timeline forward, many of those purchases lose their appeal instantly. And when that happens often enough, something begins to change. Your money stops disappearing without explanation. Instead, it begins accumulating quietly in the background. Not in a dramatic way at first, just slowly. But slow growth has a strange psychological effect. It builds confidence. When you see progress, even small progress, it becomes easier to continue. Debt shrinks. Savings grow. Investments begin to move with the market over time. And suddenly the future stops feeling uncertain. It begins to feel possible. Alex realized that the real danger in your 20s isn't making a few mistakes. Everyone makes them. The real danger is drifting for too long without noticing. Because drifting allows years to pass without direction. And years are incredibly valuable when it comes to building financial stability. Time multiplies both good and bad decisions. That's why two people who start their careers in similar places can end up living completely different financial lives 20 years later. Not because one person was lucky, but because one person started paying attention earlier. Imagine two versions of the same person. One continues living exactly the same way for the next decade. Spending grows with income. Investing always starts next year. Debt slowly lingers. The other version makes a few small adjustments. Spends slightly less than they earn. Invests consistently. Avoids unnecessary debt. Keeps housing and transportation reasonable. Those two paths might look almost identical for the first few years. But time exaggerates the difference. After 10 years, the gap becomes noticeable. After 20 years, it becomes dramatic. And after 30 years, it becomes life-changing. That's the power of compounding. Decisions. Not just compounding money. Compounding habits. Compounding awareness. Compounding discipline. Alex didn't become a financial expert overnight. There were still mistakes. Still unexpected expenses. Still months that felt tight. But the direction had changed. Instead of running in place financially, progress was finally happening. Slowly, quietly, but consistently. And the most surprising realization came later. Financial freedom doesn't arrive as a sudden moment. There's no dramatic day where everything changes. Instead, it appears gradually. First, the emergency fund exists. Then debt disappears. Then investments start growing large enough to notice. Then work begins to feel optional instead of mandatory. Not because you want to quit tomorrow, but because you finally have choices. And choices are the real goal. The ability to walk away from a bad job. The ability to take a risk on something new. The ability to handle life's surprises without panic. Those things matter far more than luxury purchases ever will. Looking back, Alex realized something simple but powerful. The most important financial decisions in life rarely feel important when you make them. They feel ordinary. They feel small. They feel easy to postpone. But those small moments quietly shape everything that follows. And the good news is that the same rule works in your favor. Small, smart decisions repeated over time become incredibly powerful. Saving a little earlier, investing consistently, avoiding unnecessary debt, living slightly below your means, ignoring the pressure to perform wealth instead of building it. None of these habits are flashy, but they build lives filled with options. And the earlier someone starts, the easier the journey becomes. Because time is the one resource you can never replace. Every year you give your money to grow makes the future easier. Every year you delay makes the path a little steeper. That doesn't mean it's too late if you're starting later. It simply means today matters more than yesterday. The moment you start paying attention is the moment things begin to change. Not instantly, but inevitably. And one day, years from now, you might look back and realize something surprising. The life that once felt financially stressful slowly became stable. The future that once felt uncertain became manageable. And the small habits that once seemed insignificant ended up shaping the entire direction of your life. All because you decided to stop drifting and start paying attention. And the strange thing about finally paying attention to money is that it starts to change how you see almost everything around you. Alex began noticing patterns that had always been there but were easy to ignore before. For example, advertisements suddenly looked different. Before, they felt harmless. Just background noise. A cool commercial for a new car. An ad showing someone living in a beautiful apartment. Someone wearing expensive clothes, smiling like life had become perfect. But once Alex started thinking more deeply about money, those ads began to look less like inspiration and more like persuasion. Every ad was selling a feeling: confidence, success, freedom, status. But rarely was it actually selling something that created those things. A nicer car doesn't automatically make someone successful. A more expensive apartment doesn't automatically create happiness. And buying more things rarely creates more freedom. In many cases, it does the opposite. It quietly replaces freedom with obligation. Another monthly payment, another bill, another responsibility that must be maintained. And once Alex saw that pattern clearly, something else became obvious. The people who actually had financial freedom often looked surprisingly ordinary. They weren't always the people driving the flashiest cars. They weren't always the ones posting the most luxurious vacations online. Sometimes they looked almost boring from the outside. Normal houses, normal clothes, normal cars. But behind that normal appearance was something incredibly powerful: control. Their money wasn't disappearing every month. It was working quietly in investments, working quietly in savings, working quietly in opportunities. They could say yes to because they had prepared for them. And that's when Alex understood something most people don't realize until much later in life. Wealth often hides, but financial stress is usually loud. People under financial pressure often feel the need to display success. People who are actually secure rarely feel that pressure. They don't need approval from strangers on the internet. They don't need constant upgrades to prove anything. They simply live their lives. And that shift in mindset changed something inside Alex. Instead of trying to look successful, Alex started focusing on becoming stable. Instead of chasing the next lifestyle upgrade, Alex started protecting the gap between income and spending. Because that gap was the real engine of financial progress. The bigger the gap, the more money could be directed toward the future. And every dollar sent toward the future was a dollar that would eventually return with friends. Tom would multiply it. Slowly, quietly, but relentlessly. Years passed. Alex continued working, living life, enjoying experiences. But the difference now was intention. Spending still happened. Travel still happened. Fun still happened. But those decisions were deliberate instead of automatic. And something remarkable began to happen. The sense of financial anxiety that once existed in the background started fading. Bills no longer felt like threats. Unexpected expenses became manageable instead of terrifying. Work became something Alex chose to do rather than something that felt impossible to escape. And that's the true transformation that smart financial habits create. Not instant riches, not flashy lifestyles, but peace of mind. The ability to breathe easier when thinking about the future. The ability to take risks when opportunities appear. The ability to live life without constant financial fear. Looking back, Alex realized something that would have sounded unbelievable years earlier. Financial freedom wasn't built through one perfect decision. It was built through hundreds of small ones. choosing the reasonable option instead of the impressive one, investing consistently instead of waiting for the perfect moment, paying attention instead of drifting through financial life, ignoring the pressure of comparison, and perhaps most importantly, understanding that money is simply a tool that can either build your future or slowly dismantle it, depending on how it's used. And the most powerful part of that realization is this: it's never too late to start using that tool differently. Whether someone is 22, 35, or even 50, the moment you begin paying attention is the moment the direction of your financial life can change, not instantly, but steadily, because money, like almost everything important in life, responds to consistency more than perfection. You don't have to be flawless. You don't have to make every decision perfectly. You simply have to start making slightly better choices more often. And when those choices repeat over years, they compound into something extraordinary. One day, far in the future, Alex may look back at the early years of adulthood and smile. Not because everything was done perfectly, but because at some point along the way, Alex stopped drifting financially and started steering.